Hello, everyone. Welcome to Beyond Life Paranormal Podcast. I'm your host, Russell Reynolds, and we got a good show tonight. Hope you all had a good 4th of July. Everybody come back safe, all their fingers and toes. So we are back to our regular schedule. Before we get into tonight's show, let's say hi to the chat. Hey, Gary, how are you? Welcome. Hey, Barbara, welcome in. Um, So, like I said, we got a good show tonight. We're gonna plug two events. We're not gonna do our full events tonight. Hey, Sandy, welcome in. Um, these are only a few short weeks away, so come out and see us at Portertown Paracon, August 8th. My dad and I are one of the presenters. We got Sorry guys, I'm having equipment trouble tonight. Hey Jerry, welcome in. So August 8th, come on out and check out the event. It's free. They don't charge to get in. So come on out and see us. Beyond Life Paranormal Research LLC will be there as well, with merch and equipment that we build and the 3D printed stuff and the figurines. My cousin Kathy, who's our merch manager, she will be there. And then shortly after that, we will be at Crypticon KC. And we are headlining the paranormal portion of Crypticon this year. First ever they're doing paranormal at the KC one. So come on through, check it out. We are guest speaking there as well. So if you want to learn about our family and the Warren's Occult Museum and all that great stuff and what we do, come on through and come to our table. We'll have shirts and stuff there and stuff for sale. So with that being said, tonight we're going to get into the show. Yeah, Gary, we've been hitting them here too. We had a wicked thunderstorm come through earlier. We're expecting some more tonight. But yeah, tonight's show, I thought we'd talk about the notorious outlaw Jesse James and his gang, and then the hauntings at the James farmhouse, which I have been to the farmhouse there in Kearney, and I can confirm it is haunted. There were some things that we tried to debunk and we couldn't. So, that being said, we're going to start off on the history of Jesse, where it all started for him, his brother Frank, the Youngers. It all started with this man right here. This is William Contrell. He was part of led the Contrell Raiders during the Civil War. He was one of the feared guys in the Civil War. A lot of people feared him even outside the Civil War as well. So William Clark Contrell was a product of his times. He was a man made up of personalities, passions, and politics that surrounded him. Without the issue of slavery that ignited the nation and the turbulent individuals like John Brown and James Henry Lane that inflamed the border of Kansas and Missouri, history would never have recorded his name. To study the history of the border warfare between Kansas and Missouri, it also to study the character of the people living there at the time. However meaningless, a slight provocation was taken as a personal insult and could escalate into a feud or a personal duel or a lifetime of personal hatred between the offending parties. There was a conflict along the border long before there was hatred and bloodshed. It was there that the men controlled by personal pride and patriotism lived, and in whose homes hospitality and generosity were in the way of life. Conflict arose between those already established in the region and those northern immigrants from the larger cities of the north who came west in hopes of an easy life and quick fortune. Most of the settlers along the border at this time were opportunists. Life was hard, and a chance to earn money to stay alive didn't come along every day. Many sought opportunities and honest endeavors, while others sought a dollar in any way they offered a lucrative deal. Some sought their fortune in new political future along the border, and some sought their fortune in law. But for everyone who sought an honest living, 10 others were looking to make a quick dollar by jumping someone else's land claim, larceny, or deceit. Those incompatible sectional differences also deemed the growing conflict between the Missourians and Kansans. Most stories about Quantrill are merely lies. How could a single human being be written about in history as a devil incarnate without love for either of his parents or family, and whose own mother was declared to be the mother in name only, showing no love for her son? Author William L.C. Connolly said that Quantrill's father was an embezzler and a thief and was looked down upon by his neighbors. Quantrill was described as fiendish for skinning neighbors' cats and shooting pigs through their ears to listen to them squeal. Connolly reported that when Quantrill courted young women, his talk would turn sadistic, and he commented on how many men he could hang from certain tree limbs. In his life in Kansas before the Civil War, he was described as being shiftless and without a visible means of support, even stealing from his neighbors and local merchants. He was called a bloodthirsty killer, murdering and stealing from those in Missouri and Kansas. Connolly said that no one in Quantrill's band trusted him, and he made them nervous and edgy. It was said he had a mistress, and after the war, she opened a house of prostitution in St. Louis. When the war was coming to a close, Quantrill was even said to have scholars who knew of Connolly's intent and had read portions of his manuscript before publication, warned him against his extreme statements, but they were ignored, and the contradictions discovered were based on hearsay, lies, half-truths, and outright distortions. Now, to the Civil War, how could this so-called fiend have been a respected school teacher? How could he have organized and led up to 400 men in history's most notable band of guerrilla fighters? Why did regular Confederate Army soldiers who outranked him yield to him and place themselves subordinate in his command? How could he be so hated by his own men and still lead them in the van of most renowned battles throughout Missouri, winning victories over superior Union forces? Mothers entrusted their sons to him. Citizens served him as spies. Women willingly nursed him and his men, while his followers were intensely loyal to him, even guarding him in battle. Most of his followers were God-fearing farmers trying to live a Christian lifestyle. Critics may point out that associating upright, righteous people wouldn't necessarily make Quantrill the same. But from experience, God-fearing, righteous people would not have followed a deprived, degenerate, psychotic killer. After the war, one of Quantrill's men stayed. You who were not there cannot realize for a moment the dreadful passions that were roused in the hearts of men during those fearful years. The Missouri border during the Civil War was the scene of the greatest savagery in American history. Never before or since have Americans exhibited such brutality towards their fellow Americans. The controversy surrounding William Clark Quantrill is nothing less than a scandal. At the time, the Northern press conspired to blacken his name and those of his followers, a conspiracy that continues even today. Captain William Gregg Quantrill, adjutant, reported in a letter after the war that Quantrill and his men have been unjustly slandered by people of the North, a people who even to this day know nothing of them except for what they have read in irresponsible books and newspapers. Gregg says, "It is not enough that their valor is recognized. It is not enough that their honesty is confessed. We ask our northern border, we ask all our mankind and all our womankind a recognition of their patriotism, their love of the country and liberty. We cannot remain silent so long as the pen of the historian casts any aspersion or the tongue of apologies for their acts. It is justice for which we plead, not charity." Colonel R.H. Hunt, who served in the Union Army fighting against Captain Gregg, said of him after the war, "That is, so far as his memory serves him, his statements can be depended upon absolutely. He is a man who would not willingly misrepresent." Quantrill did not act alone, and his followers suffered a similar mischaracterization. According to the Northern press, every guerrilla was a bloodthirsty, brutal, psychotic killer. Their relatives were low class and criminal, and their women were said to have loose morals. Historians refused to acknowledge that Quantrill and his men were soldiers. Instead, they referred to them as outlaws. From this perspective, Quantrill's partisan ranger band could not be credited with winning a military victory in open battle. So they became bloodthirsty killers who murdered and massacred their victims. The accounts were written down through history and by a victorious enemy over a beaten but unbowed foe, John McCorkle. One of Quantrill's men wrote a book about his experiences with Quantrill, explaining that it was not published in any script or malice or hatred, but so that the truth may be known, that the world may know that Quantrill and his band were justified in nearly all of their acts, and that they were not altogether bad, that they were driven to desperation by brutal outrage committed against them and their friends. Likewise, Captain Gregg wrote that history after history has been written of Quantrill and his men, none of which they characterize as true, and that which is not true is not history. The victor's perspective largely shapes of understanding of the Civil War. Still, most inhabitants along the western border were Southern sympathizers, and their viewpoints has been generally ignored. By today's standards of conduct and values, there's only no way to clearly understand the surroundings and the characters of men on the western border. Ideals such as chivalry and good manners include kindness towards the younger people, weaker, kept the fabric of their society together, integrity and paramount for a respectful character, pride, honor, devotion. These intrinsic values, which have all but lost their importance except to a chosen and sacred, was taken from them by the government, which was supposed to protect them. Prejudiced historians and journalists have significantly distorted every aspect of Quantrill's life. The hatred of his Kansas enemies and of those he fought against during the war was manifested in writings and was grossly exaggerated by those who have never come face to face with him. Only sensational claims previously heard by those who had cause to try to blacken his name because of their own political views and sectional feelings have been noted for history. Quantrill's critics have painted him in the worst possible light, and in conclusion have told unfounded and unproven stories about him. Many past writings on Quantrill have been written by Kansas, Northern writers, and others without military backgrounds or experience, merely capitalizing on the sensationalism and fictionalized accounts of Quantrill and his men. Many repeat the same worn-out rumors and insecurities, while still claiming they have done extensive research. A modern military saying is, for those who fight for it, freedom has a flavor the protected never taste. This experience is much more beneficial, and actual combat veterans write books than by authors who have never had a military experience, who have never walked the same ground, or are familiar with the area known as Quantrill country. By viewing Quantrill through different eyes, we can see him as he really was an educated and moral young man who began his career protecting the lives and property of the people who were daily being robbed and killed by an enemy who was hiding their criminal deeds behind the cloak of a flag that they used for their own selfish greed and ambitions. We should seek to dignify his life, not romanticize it. Loved and respected by his men, hated and feared by his enemies, adored by the young Southern women whom he met, and befriended by those who sought justice and protection. This is William Clark Quantrill. This is the truth behind the man, the soldier. Hey, Carol. Welcome in. So that's saying that Quantrill wasn't a bad man that they labeled out, and I mean even today he's still labeled as an outlaw, a bloodthirsty killer. And the one they really label as a bad man was Bloody Bill Anderson, which was another one that was in the Civil War with Quantrill. He's the one that led Quantrill, was Bloody Bill Anderson. And the James brothers and the Youngers through that war. But Jesse and them just carried on after the war with the whole robbing the trains and the banks and becoming outlaws. So he was an educated man. The women loved him. He was well respected, but the historians made him out to be a bad man, that he was a killer and he did all these bad things. What do you guys think in the chat? And I mean, it still goes on today in history out here in Missouri that Quantrill is a bad man. And most of these guys are all buried in the cemetery in Richmond, Missouri, I believe. Richmond or Liberty, one of the two. I know the Ford brothers are buried here in Missouri as well. So we're going to move on from Quantrill, and we're going to get into the Civil War part of it with Quantrill and the James crew. As many know, this is a young picture of Jesse James that you see a lot of times on shirts and stuff and a lot of posters too. This is a picture that's supposed to be the James Younger gang. You got Jesse and Frank and the Youngers. I don't believe the Fords are in this picture, but we're going to get into the Civil War part of it. During the Civil War, both the James and Younger brothers followed William Quantrill's lead in a band of ruthless bushwhackers, gaining a taste for violence in the bitter conflict that ravaged the divided state of Missouri. Robbing banks, trains, and stage coaches for 10 years, the gang's post-war crimes began in 1866. However, it wasn't until 1868 that authorities determined that Cole Younger, Jesse James, and Frank James were involved in the crime spree, which led to the gang being called the James Younger Gang. The gang soon became one of the most famous in American history and included numerous outlaw members who shifted from one crime to the next. Many of the gang members met during the Civil War, most of whom rode with Quantrill Raiders. Missouri was a divided state, with most residents supporting the Southern cause, but the state declared for the Union. The gang of bushwhackers was involved in several conflicts, most in Missouri and surrounding states. Before, during, and after Civil War, both the James and Younger brothers were outspoken partisans for the South. When the war was over, these men who fought mainly in guerrilla bands were embittered and continued to associate with their old war comrades. During the tumultuous Reconstruction era in Missouri, many former soldiers turned to the life of crime. Liberty, Missouri, where there is a bank that the James and Younger gang had robbed. The safe is actually still there. It's a museum now. It is called the Jesse James Bank Museum. The first bank to be robbed by the James Younger gang was in Liberty, Missouri on February 13th, 1866. Their first robbery took place on February 13, 1866, when the gang stormed the Clay County Savings Association in Liberty, Missouri, stealing over $60,000 in cash and bonds. It was the first daylight peacetime armed bank robbery in the U.S. history, and when the outlaws were making their escape, gunfire erupted, and an innocent 17-year-old boy by the name of George Wymore was killed. Missouri authorities suspected that a known Confederate guerrilla leader named Archie Clement was the group leader, and soon a price was put on his head. Fearless, however, Clement next led the gang in robbing the Alexander Mitchell and Company Bank in Lexington, Missouri on October 30th, 1866, making off with about $2,000. Afterward, Clement began to lead the gang and mediating Missouri residents to sway their votes against the Republican Party in an upcoming election. When the Missouri State Militia got involved, he was killed on December 13, 1866. Despite the loss of their leader, the outlaws remained together and continued their crime spree for the next decade, allegedly involved in the following robberies. February 13, 1866 was the Clay County Savings Association, Liberty, Missouri. They got away with $62,000. The October 30th, 1866, Alexander Mitchell and County Bank, Lexington, Missouri, they got away with $2,000. On March 2nd, 1867, Judge John McLean Banking House, Savannah, Missouri. The amount is unknown what they got away with out of there. May 22nd, 1867, Hughes and Wasson Bank in Richmond, Missouri, they got away with $4,000 from that bank. March 20th, 1868, Nimrod Long Baking Company, Russellville, Kentucky, they got away with $14,000 there. December 7th, 1869, Davies County Savings Bank in Gallatin, Missouri, they got away with $1,700, which that bank, I don't live too far from that bank that they robbed. The actual vault is still there in Gallatin, Missouri, that they robbed. During that robbery, they got shot up pretty good. That one was an ambush. They were waiting. They got word that the James gang was coming to rob the bank there, and they got shot up pretty bad. June 3rd, 1871, Accobock Brothers Bank in Carrollton, Iowa, they got $6,000 from that bank. April 29th, 1872, Bank of Columbia, Kentucky, they got $600. September 26, 1872, Kansas City Exposition Ticket Office, in Kansas City, Missouri, they got $10,000 from that. May 27, 1873, St. Genevieve Savings Bank in St. Genevieve, Missouri, they got $4,100 from there. July 21st, 1873, Chicago Rock Island Pacific Railroad, Adair, Iowa, they got $6,000 from that train robbery. January 15th, 1874, they robbed a stagecoach in Hot Springs, Arkansas for $3,000. January 31st, 1874, Iron Mountain Railroad, Gads Hill, Missouri, they got $12,000. April 7th, 1874, two stagecoaches, Waverly and Lexington, Missouri. It's an unknown amount they got away with. December 7th, 1874, Tishomingo Savings Bank in Corinth, Mississippi. They got $10,000 from that. December 8th, 1874, Kansas Pacific Railroad, Mercy, Kansas. They got $55,000 from that. Man, they had to do some heavy riding if they robbed the bank December 7th in 1854 in Mississippi and then made their way all the way to Kansas for the next day to rob that bank in Kansas. And then September 5th, 1875, Huntington Bank, Huntington, West Virginia. They got $10,000 from that. July 7th, 1876, Missouri Pacific Railroad, Otterville, Missouri. They got $15,000 from that. September 7th, 1876, the First National Bank in Minnesota. They didn't get away with any. That's where a lot of them, they were ambushed, which is what I'm coming up here to. The attempted robbery in Northfield, Minnesota would spell the death of the James Younger gang, though a later gang would be formed called the James Gang. After taking the train to Minneapolis in early September 1876, the group split up. One party went to Mankato and the other to Red Wing on either side of Northfield, Minnesota. After scouting the area, they attempted to rob the Northfield Bank on September 7, 1876. Jesse and Frank James, along with Bob Younger, went inside the bank while Cole and Jim Younger, Bill Chadwell, Clell Miller, and Charlie Pitts stood guard outside. Inside the bank, the three outlaws deemed that the vault be open and that the money be surrendered. However, Joseph Lee Haywood, the bank clerk on duty, refused to do so and was shot and killed. Hearing shots, Northfield citizens realized that the robbery was in progress and, taking up arms, began to shoot at those outside, killing Miller and the Chadwells and hitting Cole Younger in the thigh. In the meantime, Jesse, Frank, and Bob Younger fled from the bank, and Bob was shot in the right elbow. Returning fire, the gang killed Nicholas Gustafsson, a Swedish man who was caught in the crossfire. Surviving gang members then took off and were quickly pursued by the posses. Near Mantico, the gang split up, with the Younger brothers and Charlie Pitts going one way and the James brothers going another. After covering some 400 miles in the search for the outlaws, the posse caught up with the Younger near Medalia, Minnesota on September 21st, 1876. After a gunfight erupted, Charlie Pitts was killed and the Younger brothers were further wounded. Finally, they surrendered. Tried in Faribault, Minnesota, they were found guilty of murder and sentenced to 25 years in the state prison at Stillwater. Bob Younger died in prison in 1889. Jim was pardoned in 1901 but committed suicide the following year. And Cole, who was also pardoned in 1901, lived until 1916. In the meantime, the James brothers had escaped and made their way back to Missouri. They then moved to Nashville, Tennessee, where they lived peacefully for the next 3 years. However, the restless Jesse began a new gang in 1879 and renewed his criminal career, leading the James gang until he died in 1882. The outlaws again robbed banks, trains, and stagecoaches. Throughout the successful years of the James Younger gang, the prominent members were Frank James as a young man, Alexander Franklin James, 1843 to 1915. Frank surrendered in October 1882 and was tried twice, but was acquitted both times. He died of a heart attack on February 18, 1915. Jesse Wooden James, 1847 to 1882. James gang member Robert Ford murdered Jesse on April 3rd, 1882. McClellan Clell Miller, 1850 to 1876. He was killed during the Northfield, Minnesota bank robbery on September 7th. Jim Younger, 1848-1902, after serving 25 years in prison in Northfield, Minnesota, attempted robbery. He was released 1901 and killed himself on October 19, 1902. John Harrison Younger, 1851 to 1874, killed in a shootout with Pinkerton agents near Roscoe, Missouri on March 17th in 1874. Thomas Coleman Cole Younger, after serving 1844 to 1916, after serving 25 years in prison for the Northfield, Minnesota attempted robbery, he was released and died on March 21st, 1916. Robert Bob Younger, 1853-1889, after the failed robbery attempt in Northfield, Minnesota, he was sent to prison and died there of tuberculosis on September 16th of 1889. Other members: James Jim Anderson, brother to William Bloody Bill Anderson. Jim was thought to have been killed by fellow James Younger gang member George Shepard in Austin, Texas. Bill Chadwell, a.k.a. William Stilts, Jack Ladd, J. Ward, 1840s to 1876, killed in an attempted bank robbery in Northfield, Minnesota on September 7, 1876. Archibald Little Archie Clement, 1846 to 1866, federal guerrilla under the name Bloody Bill Anderson in the Civil War. He was the first leader of the James Younger gang. Missouri State Militia killed him on December 13th of 1866. Jacob Franklin Gregg, 1844 to 1906. He was part of the gang during their first robbery of the Clay County Savings Association in Liberty, Missouri. Later, he moved to Texas, where he died in 1906. John Jarrett, 1836 to 1868 or 1906. After participating in the 5 bank robberies, he is thought to have died in a house fire in 1868. Most recently, however, strong proof surfaced that he died in Greenwood, British Columbia, Canada, where the Greenwood Heritage Society recently unveiled a new grave marker for the elusive outlaw. Hobbs Carey participated in only in the Otterville, Missouri train robbery and spent 2 years in prison. Arthur C. McCoy, 1825 to 1880, after participating in several robberies and killing a Pinkerton agent, he moved his family to Texas, where he was thought to have died in 1880. Redmond Red Merkus, or Munkers, 1845 to 1867, he was with the gang in the first robbery of the Clay County Savings Association in Liberty, Missouri, shot and killed by the Missouri State Militia on May 18th of 1867. Allen H. Palmer, 1848-1927, rode with William Quantrill during the Civil War and afterward was allegedly present during the Clay County Savings Association robbery in Liberty, Missouri on February 13th of 1866. Later married Susan Lavina James, sister of Frank and Jesse James, and moved to Texas, where he died October 25th of 1927. Alexander Dauphin Donnie Pence, which was also known as Bud Pence, he rode with William Quantrill during the Civil War and allegedly participated in the Liberty, Missouri bank robbery in 1866. He later became a respected sheriff in Nelson County, Kentucky, and died of typhoid fever in 1896. Thomas Edward Bud Pence, 1842 to 1880, rode with William Quantrill during Civil War and allegedly participated in Liberty, Missouri bank robbery in 1866. He died in 1880. Charles Pitts was killed after a failed robbery in Northfield, Minnesota bank. George Washington Shepherd, 1842 to 1917, he served 3 years in prison for the Bank of Columbia robbery in Kentucky in 1872. Oliver Shepherd, 1842 to 1868, he was killed by a posse in Jackson County, Missouri on April 4th, 1868. Charles Fletcher Taylor rode with William Quantrill during Civil War and allegedly participated in Missouri's bank robbery in 1866. He was later elected to be state legislator and died in 1912. The victims of the James Younger Gang, Kearney, Missouri, 1877, Dan Askew, they got born somewhere in the 1800s, died 1875. Neighbor east of the James Farm near Kearney, Missouri, Askew was found dead on April 12th of 1875. Askew was believed to have harpooned Pinkerton spy Jack Ladd, and the killing was thought to have been in revenge for the Pinkerton bombing of Jesse James Farm in 1875, which we'll get into that a little bit. Afterwards, everyone in Clay County who did not consider the James boys heroes grew too frightened to speak out against them. Alonzo Bunker, 1800s to 1876, the assistant cashier at the First National Bank in Northfield, Minnesota, was shot in the shoulder during the attempted robbery on September 7th. However, Bunker would recover. Edwin B. Daniels, 1800 to 1874, St. Clair County, Missouri deputy sheriff, killed by Jim Younger near Roscoe, Missouri on March 17, 1874. Dennis Foley, on July 21, 1873, the James Younger gang made their first train robbery at Adair, Iowa. The gang hid along a bank after disconnecting two rails of the track and pulling out the spikes. Anticipating that the engineer would stop, the plan failed when the engineer, John Rafferty, instead slammed on the air brakes and the train derailed, killing Rafferty. When the engine crushed him, fireman Dennis Foley was also seriously injured. Though things didn't go as the gang planned, they went on to rob the train and its passengers of some $6,000. B.G. Griffin, 1800s to 1867, on the afternoon of May 22nd, 1867, the James Younger gang appeared Richmond, Missouri, to rob Hughes and Wasson Bank. During the robbery, 3 men were killed, including B.G. Griffin, when he came to the aid of his dying son, Frank S. Griffin. Frank S. Griffin, 1800-1867. On the afternoon of May 22nd, 1867, the James Younger gang appeared in Richmond, Missouri, to rob the Hughes and Watson Bank. During the robbery, 3 men killed, including Frank Griffin, who was shot in the head. Upon seeing this, his father, B.G. Griffin, raced to the aid of his dying son and also received a shot in the head. Nicholas Gustafsson died in 1876, Swedish immigrant who was thought not to have been able to understand the warnings coming from the Northfield, Minnesota citizens. He was shot down in a hail of gunfire during the attempted robbery of the First National Bank. Joseph Lee Haywood, 1837-1876, acting cashier at the First National Bank in Northfield, Minnesota. He's the one that refused to open the safe for the members of the James Younger gang on September 7, 1876. Though the men threatened to slit his throat, he continued to refuse and was shot by Frank James. Jack Ladd, a Pinkerton agent, posed as a farm worker for Dan Askew, a neighbor of the James farm. Ladd and Askew were both killed on April 12, 1875, in revenge for the Pinkerton bombing of the James farm in 1875. Captain Lewis J. Lull, a.k.a. W.J. Allen, 1874, a Pinkerton agent from Chicago, Illinois. Lull was killed by John Younger near Roscoe, Missouri. Nimrod Long, when the James Younger gang robbed the bank in Russellville, Kentucky, on March 20, 1868, a bullet was fired at his head. Fortunately, the banker was shot the shot grazed him, and though he fell to the floor, he easily survived the scalp wound. R.A.C. Martin, 1872. Martin was the cashier of the Bank of Columbia, Kentucky, when the James Younger gang robbed it on April 29, 1872. Unfortunately, Martin made the mistake of going for a pistol, and for his attempt at bravery, he was shot and killed. Judge James Garnett, president of the Bank of Columbia, Kentucky, when the James Younger gang robbed it on April 29, 1872, Garnett was shot in the hand during the robbery, which caused it to be amputated years later. Judge John McLean, shot in the arm on March 2nd of 1867 during the attempted robbery of his bank in Savannah, Missouri. McLean recovered. John Rafferty, he was killed in a train derailment in Adair, Iowa, when they were planning to rob the train. John B. Shaw, on the afternoon of he died in 1867, May 2nd of 1867, the James Younger appeared in Richmond, Missouri to rob Hughes and Watson Bank. During the robbery, 3 men were killed, including Mayor John B. Shaw, who was shot in the chest. John W. Sheets in 1869, when the James Younger gang robbed the Davies County Savings and Bank in Gallatin, Missouri. On December 7th of 1869, they shot Sheets in the head. Allegedly, the gang thought that it was Major S.B. Cox who killed William Bloody Bill Anderson. Unknown girl, when the gang robbed the Kansas City Exposition on September 26, 1872, there was a dispute with the ticket seller, and a stray bullet hit a young girl in the leg. She recovered. John W. Wichter, 1874, a Pinkerton detective who had been sent to investigate the James brothers in Jackson County, Missouri. Unfortunately, upon his arrival, he let one too many people know about his plans and was soon found shot to death alongside a rural road on March 11, 1874. George Waymore, 1849-1866, after making their first robbery on February 13th of 1866 in Liberty, Missouri, shots were fired upon making their escape. Unfortunately, a stray bullet hit his innocent 17-year-old Weimar, who was standing in front of the Green Hotel. Later, the family would say that they received a letter of apology from Jesse James. So that's kind of the stuff they did around. Let's go to the chat here. They got a few nice hauls from the time period. Yeah, and there's still some actually gold still out there, Barbara, that has never been found of Jesse James. They hid it someplace, and they have never found it. Yeah, they were on a roll. They robbed quite a bit, but they all said that Jesse was the crazy one of the group. Jesse wasn't the crazy one of the group. Frank was more the one. If you looked at him cross-eyed, he'd put a bullet in your head. Jesse wasn't that way. And we'll get back when we have a biker group called Jesse, the James Gang in Connecticut. Oh, wow. I didn't know that. You know, Sandra Bullock's husband is related to the James Gang. Oh, cool. I didn't know that. Frank James was killed by no, Jesse was killed by the coward Robert Ford in his house in St. Joe, Missouri, which we're going to get into that here in a little bit. There was not few civilians that got killed. I mean, the boy, the one guy that got shot in the head that was innocent, there was a few. Yeah, they were a busy bunch of guys. But what was weird is March 11, 1867, is that right? Yep. I always wondered if there's money or gold buried still at the James farm. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's at the James farm, to be honest with you. I mean, Jesse was all over this area. I mean, he was in my area where I live because the bank that he robbed up in Gallatin, Missouri is not too far from here. There was a cave that he hid out, which is only about 10 miles from my house. When they robbed that bank, they had a cave they would hide out in. Somebody actually found that cave and found stuff written in there of the James gang being in there. My cousin Kathy's property, they have documented diary entries from my cousin Brad's family that the grandparents would hide out Jesse James and his crew when they were riding through, because the one girl actually had a crush on Jesse. And they've got diary entries where the little girl was sitting on Jesse's lap and they would give them money for feeding them. They would hide them out in the barn and feed them. And the Pinkertons would ride through there after him as well, with that. So, what they didn't mention in this was after the life of crime with Frank and Cole Younger, they went on to work in the circus doing trick shooting for a while. Frank went back to live in the house after the mother had passed away, and he would give tours of the farmhouse, this is the farmhouse. He would give tours of the house. His mom used to give tours of the house as well. There used to be the front left of that house, there used to be a tree in that yard. The tree is rotted away. It's gone now. Jesse's and Frank's stepfather, his last name was Samuel. He was hung from the tree in the yard because when the Pinkertons came riding in, wanting to know, they got wind that Jesse and Frank were in town to see their mother. When they rode in, they grabbed him and they drug him out of the house to question him, and he would not give up Frank and Jesse. Well, they strung him from the tree and they hung him. And he was a prominent figure here in Missouri. He's one of the ones that founded the William Jewell College in Liberty, Missouri. He was one of the big investors of that. And the Pinkertons, again, got word that the James gang was in town. They snuck up to the house and they threw a firebomb through the window into the back room. The back room of the house, there was what was in the house that they gave? Oh, they gave tours so people could see the inside of the house. They still do to this day. You can actually go to the house and take a tour. But Zerelda, Jesse's mom, and Jesse's little stepbrother, Archie Samuel, who was only about 15 at the time, was in the back kitchen area. And that the Pinkertons threw the firebomb through the back window into that room. Well, Jesse's mom seen it. She grabbed it, went to throw it in the fireplace, and about the same time she threw it, it went off, which it ended up blowing her hand off to about here and killing Archie Samuel in the process. In the back of the house, it's still got the original siding on the back from where the firebomb went through the window. So like I said, they never mentioned in the history about Frank when he turned himself in and he got pardoned and got out. So did Cole Younger. They went on to the circus to do trick shooting with their guns. The life of crime for them were over, and that was right after Jesse was assassinated. And when Jesse was assassinated, his mom had him buried there on the farm behind the house. In the actual house, her bedroom is the one last room just past the kitchen part where the firebomb came through. She had her bed and a rocking chair pointed at the window, and she would sit there in that rocking chair with a double-barrel shotgun, watching over her son's grave to make sure nobody tried to come dig it up. And for a one-armed lady, she could still carry a shotgun. They had to amputate the rest of her arm off to her elbow. Some say she was a tough lady. And you've probably seen many of the movies. There's several movies of Jesse James out. The two that are most accurate for the Jesse James movies would be the Young Riders or the Long Riders, something like that. That's got the Carradine brothers, the Keach brothers, the Quaid brothers in it. That one and then the Rob Lowe one are the most accurate of Jesse James. And when you go to the house for the tours, you get to watch part of the movie with them in it. They show the Rob Lowe one. But the one with the Keach brothers, the Carradine brothers, the Keach brothers are the ones that play Jesse and Frank, and then the Carradine brothers play the Youngers. And then you got the Quaid brothers that play in there. And that one depicts, and it's got quite a bit of them. Yeah, Jerry, so do I. I like the American Outlaws as well, too. And I heard Jesse used to give money back to the poor. He would rob from the rich when he robbed those banks, and he'd give it back to the poor. And I have another picture. We're going to talk about Jesse's wife, which I don't know if many of you know. Her name, they called her Z Mims. She was actually a first cousin of Jesse James. Here's a picture of Jesse's wife. And she was present in the house when Robert Ford assassinated Jesse. A little bit of history on Z. Z Mims was born on July 21st of 1845 in Logan, Kentucky to Pastor John W. Mims and Mary James Mims. Zerelda was one of 12 children. Her mother was the sister of Robert James, Jesse James's father, making them first cousins. As she was more familiarly called Z, was the name for Jesse's mother. This, however, did not stop the pair from falling in love while Jesse was living temporarily with his aunt and uncle in Missouri in 1865. The couple was engaged for 9 years while the James Younger gang was in full swing. Finally, they married at her sister's home in Kearney, Missouri on April 24th of 1874 while honeymooning with his bride, Z, on the Gulf of Mexico in Galveston, Texas. A reporter from the St. Louis Dispatch did what the Pinkertons had failed to do: track down Jesse. A little more than a year later, in 1875, Z bore their first child, Jesse Edward Tim James. On February 28th of 1878, the couple had twins, Gould and Montgomery. However, both were either stillborn or died the same day. The next year, on June 17th of 1879, Z had a daughter that the couple named Mary Susan James. By this time, the James Younger gang had ceased to exist with the capture of the Younger brothers during the Northfield, Minnesota raid in 1876. However, Jesse had started the new James gang that continued to rob trains, the last of which occurred on September 7th, 1881 in Glendale, Missouri. Shortly after this holdup, Jesse moved his family to St. Joseph, Missouri, where they settled under Jesse's assumed name, Tom Howard. With a $10,000 reward over his head, Z tried to get Jesse to take on a more normal life, and Jesse agreed after one last great bank robbery in Platte County, Missouri. It was during the planning of this robbery and a meeting with Charles and Robert Bob Ford at Jesse's home that Bob would kill Jesse on April 3rd of 1882. Sadly, Z and her children were in the kitchen when the shooting occurred. At the deafening sound of gun blasts, young Jesse Jr. ran into the living room to find his father on the floor with blood pouring from his head. Z then began to scream as little Mary started crying. Though Z tried desperately to stop the blood, it was too late. Her husband was already dead. Bob Ford was already out the door, and Charles spent the next few moments trying to tell her that the gun had gone off accidentally. Then he too quickly exited, running after his brother. In no time, the word spread of the shooting, and crowds began to gather around the home, talking instantly about the killing of the notorious outlaw Jesse James. Young Jesse Jr., who was only 6 at the time, didn't even know who Jesse James was, believing his father's name was John Davis Howard, and his own name was Tim Howard. After his death, Jesse was packed on ice and taken by train to Kearney, Missouri, where he was displayed and viewed by hundreds of friends, admirers, curiosity seekers. Later, he was buried on the family farm in the plot near the house so that Jesse's mother, Zerelda, could watch for trespassers or souvenir hunters. Jesse's family, when Jesse was killed, most people assumed that he had left a wealthy widow, but that was not the case at all. The only valuables that were owned were a few weapons, a bit of stolen jewelry, and assorted memorabilia. Soon, almost everything in the household was auctioned to pay the creditors. Z and her children were forced to move in with her brother in Kansas City. The children were to suffer even more as Z suffered from terrible depression after Jesse's death. Donning entirely black clothing, she never changed out of it. She never remarried and became recluse. Young Jesse James Jr. was forced to work at 11 to help support his mother and his little sister. Though the family suffered emotionally and financially for the rest of Z's life, she refused all offers to publish books or other information regarding Jesse's life. She died on November 13th in 1900 in Kansas City, Missouri, and was buried in Mount Holyoke Cemetery in Kearney, Missouri. About 18 months later, her husband was moved from his resting place on the James family farm and placed next to her, where their bodies remain today. Which there's some theory on that. A lot of people don't believe Jesse was killed that day. Jesse was one, he would never take his guns off for anybody. And this is Z with Jesse's 2 kids. Many believe that Jesse skipped and left. He went to live down in Texas and took on a new name. He left his wife. His wife stayed in Kansas City, and he moved out to Texas. There was too many coincidences of some DNA stuff. Oh, neat, Gary. There was too many coincidences on that stuff that Jesse was down in Texas. There was someone that had his scars that looked like him, went under a different name, and lived there till he passed away of old age. So I'm wondering if Jesse still had contact with his mother and she knew it too. I know the grandkids had lived in the farmhouse through the 50s when he passed away. The farmhouse they put some modern stuff in there. There is some electric, but the living room is still original and everything in that house. There's still kerosene lanterns for lights in the living room. The newer modern kitchen is the only thing that has electric in the house. Frank's bed is still there with his wife where he lived his remaining days out. There's also stories here in Missouri that Frank James was actually captured in Warrensburg, Missouri, and was held in a jail cell out in front of the courthouse, which we did an investigation of that courthouse for an event for the Historical Society. And all the proceeds went to them for the event. But they believe that he was housed in a jail cell right out in the yard there. It was also believed that Frank was also housed in Gallatin, Missouri, in a jail cell as well out there. But there's no history confirming that he was housed there. Yeah, that poor family went through a lot. But Jesse, that it doesn't add up on your day, Christy. It doesn't add up with Jesse, Bob Ford shooting Jesse. Something doesn't add up that Jesse would turn his back like that to fix a picture and get shot like that. Like they said, Jesse would never take his guns off for anybody. Oh, awesome, Christy. Yeah, I'm getting into that too. We actually spoke on Spirit Box also with him. Yeah, I mean, I believe that Jesse faked his death because he had a $10,000 Dead or Alive wanted poster on him. And so I believe it was faked and he made his way that was a different body. Yeah, he wore him to bed. He never took him off. And Jesse was quick on the draw too. They said he was about as quick as Frank was on the draw with his guns. And I mean, him getting assassinated, as well as I do, that if he really did get assassinated, Frank would have been all over that, and Frank would have been after the Ford brothers for it. Yeah, nicknamed Quick Draw. Yeah, he was, and he was fast on the draw just like his brother was. But I mean, there was that one movie where Willie Nelson and Johnny Cash played. It was a Jesse James, and when Jesse got assassinated, that Frank went after Robert Ford. That was another story that they did in a movie too. But I mean, you would figure Frank and Cole Younger would have been all over that after Jesse was assassinated. They would have been after Robert Ford and that. And so we're going to get into the old coward right there, Robert Ford. Which he was known as the coward, best known as the dirty little coward that killed Jesse James. Robert Newton Ford was born January 13th of 1862 in Ray County, Missouri, which is where he's buried with his brother. One of 7 children of the James Thomas Ford and Mary Ann Bruin. The wiry young boy became enamored of Jesse James's daring exploits and finally got the chance to meet him in 1880. He and his older brother, Charles, began hanging out on the James gang's outer fringes. By this time, the ranks of the outlaw gang members had been diminished due to deaths, captures, and men simply moving on to other endeavors. So when the 2 brothers wanted to join the gang, Jesse let them. However, neither played a very large role. Charles allegedly participated in the Blue Cut robbery near Glendale, Missouri on September 7th, 1881. It was to be the last train robbery of the James gang, netting the 6 members some $3,000 in cash and jewelry taken from the passengers. Also participating in the robbery were Frank, Jesse James, Dick Little, and the brothers Clarence and Wood Height. Of Robert Ford's participation in any other James robberies, there is no record, and he was thought to be mostly a hanger-on, doing odd jobs and maybe holding the horses while others perpetrated the crime. A few months later, in November of 1881, Jesse moved his wife to the family of St. Joseph, Missouri, renting a house in the name of J.D. Howard. As a member of the respected community, Jesse planned to lead a straight and narrow life. However, he wanted to pull off one last bank robbery of the bank in Platte City, Missouri, hoping to make enough money to retire and become a gentleman farmer. And the Jesse James home is in St. Joseph, Missouri. It's not in the actual place anymore. They moved it up to the museum. But the state of Missouri had had enough about this time, the same time, Missouri Governor Thomas Creddenton offered $10,000 for any information leading to the capture of Frank and Jesse James. In January of 1882, 2 James gang members, Wood Height and Dick Little, on the run from the law, took refuge in the home of Martha Bolton, Bob Ford's widowed sister. One day at breakfast, Height and Little began to argue while Ford sat by watching. This dispute soon escalated and the feuding pair drew their guns. The sound of 4 rapid shots from Height's gun soon echoed through the room, one of which struck Little in the leg. Dick returned the fire, falling on the floor and hitting Height in the arm. In the meantime, Bob Ford drew his gun and, being Little's close friend, fired one shot hitting Height in the head. Which you'll see this is in an actual movie also with Brad Pitt, where Brad Pitt is playing Jesse James. Collapsing to the floor, Height died just a few minutes later. Ford then wrapped the corpse in a blanket, carried in outside, and placing it on the mule, took it into the woods where he buried Height in a shallow, unmarked grave. This killing, coupled with Ford's greed and desire for notoriety, would be death sentence for Jesse James. When word of the shooting reached authorities, Ford was arrested, but when he informed the detectives that he had access to the much wanted Jesse James, he was released. Next, Ford secretly met with Missouri Governor Thomas Creddenton and told him that if he killed the notorious outlaw, he would receive a full pardon for the Height murder and the killing of the James and the reward money. Ford agreed to perform the deed and next met with the sheriff in Clay County, where the two formulated a plan to get Jesse James. By March of 1882, some James gang members had begun to turn themselves in, leaving Jesse with little to plan a bank robbery besides Charlie and Bob Ford. Though he instinctively distrusted Robert Ford, he followed through, and on the morning of April 3rd, 1882, he was having breakfast with the Ford brothers in his home. Afterwards, the men went into the parlor where Jesse outlined his plans to rob the Platte City Bank. When Jesse noticed that a framed needlepoint picture his mother had made was hanging crookedly on the wall, he climbed onto a chair to adjust it. Suddenly, he heard the sound of Bob Ford's cocked pistol and turned slightly. Bob then shot Jesse just below the right ear, and Jesse toppled to the floor, dead. Jesse was 34 years old. Initially, Ford was charged with murdering both Wood Height and Jesse James. But true to his word, Governor Criden pardoned him while he stood trial for the murder. As to the money, he received only a fraction of the reward, returning to their hometown in Richmond, Missouri. Bob and Charles were not greeted kindly, as residents found the killing of Jesse James so distasteful that they made life unbearable for the two brothers. When he heard that Frank James was searching for them and planned to kill him in revenge for his brother's death, Charles Ford began to move from town to town. For the next 2 years, he ran like a scared rabbit, changing his name several times until finally he could take it no more and committed suicide in 1884. In the meantime, Bob Ford capitalized on his betrayal of Jesse James, taking to the stage and appearing in an act entitled Outlaws of Missouri. Night after night, Ford retold his story carefully, omitting that he had shot Jesse James in the back. But this charade was short-lived. He was greeted with catcalls, jeers, hoots, and challenges. Ford later took off to Las Vegas, New Mexico, where he operated a saloon for a short time before moving on to Creede, Colorado. Sometime after arriving in Creede, Ford was in a saloon watching a boxing match and betting heavily on the prizefighter who lost. He became furious. In a drunken rage, he decided he would kill the prizefighter, and in preparation, he and a man named Joe Palmer, member of the Soapy Smith gang, began to shoot out windows and street lamps along Main Street. Soapy Smith helped Ford and Palmer escape before they could be arrested. The two men were banned from returning, but with the help of friends and business partners, they were soon allowed to return to Creede. Ford's tent in Creede, Colorado, 1892. On May 29, 1892, he opened Ford's Exchange Dance Hall, but not with Ford. And just 6 days later, on June 6, the entire business district, including Ford's dance hall, burned to the ground. Wasting no time, Bob reopened another saloon a few days later in a makeshift tent. The very next day, on June 8th, a man named Edward O'Kelly walked in with a sawed-off shotgun. As Ford's back was to the door, O'Kelly said, "Hello, Bob." And as Ford turned around to see who addressed him, O'Kelly shot him with both barrels, killing him instantly. Some historians speculate that Soapy Smith was involved in Ford's death, perhaps talked O'Kelly into the act. Ford was buried in Creede, but was later exhumed and reburied in his hometown in Richmond. Signed where Bob Ford originally buried in Creede. In the meantime, O'Kelly was arrested and tried for murder. He was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in Colorado Penitentiary. However, after serving 10 years, he was released in 1902. 2 years later, In January 1904, lawmen shot O'Kelly down in the streets of Oklahoma City. Bob Ford, I don't trust. I think he is a sneak, but Charlie is as true as steel, Jesse James. And that was a quote from Jesse. Let's do the comments here. Yeah, it was wrong what happened to Jesse. Dillinger, I can understand he was shot. Dillinger was a con man. Yeah, I agree. He was a snitch for it. I mean, yeah, he was a snitch, and Jesse didn't trust him. That's why I don't get why Jesse had his guns off and let Bob shoot him like that. That's what doesn't add up with that whole thing. They wouldn't want to cross our outlaw Bush Ragnar, Ned Kelly. Good Lord. Yeah, oh yeah, Ned Kelly. Yeah, he was vicious. Handyman, so to speak. Was it Jesse James that wouldn't steal from a Southerner? I think so. Reminds me of a family in the era that would kill anyone who crosses their path. They were Airbnb, can't think of their name. The daughter was the mastermind. Jack the Ripper era. So it shall be justice for Jesse. In the end, Jesse got his revenge in the afterlife. He sure did. I mean, I have a feeling Frank had something to do with that too, with that O'Kelly and them getting Ford. The haunted commercial hotel, yep. Dillinger ended up human sprinkler. That was the fate for what he did. Let him a good hole in the belly, yep. He got off easy. Jesse trusted him. Yeah, he trusted his brother, but he did not trust Bob. Frank was so guilty, I agree. Yeah. And that's why the one brother, he ended up offing himself because he heard that Frank was looking for him for revenge. And but like I said, it still does not add up why Jesse had his guns off and had his back turned like that. And Jesse trusted his brother, which in my opinion was his downfall. Yeah. And I mean, it's just odd why Jesse would do that. I mean, that man never would take his guns off for anybody. That's why I don't get it. And I mean, you still see the theories today that there was a man that lived in Texas that looked just like Jesse. Jesse used to rob trains, and he'd look at the older passengers' hands and see that they had rough hands from working. So, yeah, he would rob from the rich, is what they would do. They would rob from the rich. They wouldn't rob from hardworking people or the poor. Jesse's brother played a part, guarantee. The James gangs, not that I know of. I hadn't read anything if they were in Tombstone, Arizona. They were in Mississippi, Kentucky, Arkansas, Minnesota, Kansas. I think that's as far as they went. He would take them for his brother, though. Yeah, Jesse was Robin Hood of his era. Yeah, that's for sure. And we're going to move on. Now we're going to get into the hauntings of the actual house. And I have some evidence from there that it is haunted. I can't release it, so you and me both. In fact, if you're a Jesse James fan, before we get into that, I actually designed a t-shirt of Jesse. See if I can pull it up here. So if you're interested, just put an order in at Beyond Life Paranormal Research LLC, and you can have your very own Jesse James shirt designed by me. Yeah, I've got Jesse. I've got Frank also. So yeah, just put an order in just message me on Beyond Life Paranormal Research LLC. Give me your size, all your contact info, so we can get it shipped out to you. I'll get it made and shipped out to you. Bring on the hauntings, my friend. Heard horses running around there on the farm. And then we'll dive into the hauntings where my cousin's house, which has ties to Jesse James as well. Oh, I want that. That looks cool. Yeah, you're late again, Kathy. Like always. You'll have to check out the replay. So let's get into the hauntings. I'll read what other people have experienced there. Oh, wow, they're on continuity. Better late than never. So, hey, good burritos. So, we'll get it. I'll read some of the hauntings, and then I'll fill you in on some of my own that I've experienced there. So it should come as no surprise that the Jesse James farm in Kearney, Missouri is said to be haunted. Given the violent temperament of some of its inhabitants and the untimely death of Jesse James, the violence that occurred on the property, and the tragic death of James' younger half-brother Archie, it would be more astonishing to hear that the property had no tales of ghostly activity. Jesse and Frank James were raised in the house by their mother, Zerelda, who was married to 3 husbands and bore 8 children. It was there that Jesse James was whipped as a teenager by Union militia, who strung up his stepfather and burned nearby farms. Which part of that is not also true? His stepfather was hung by the Pinkertons because he wouldn't give up Jesse and Frank. It was also here that Zerelda watched her son Archie was murdered by the Pinkerton detectives in the attack where she lost her right hand. After Jesse was killed, he was buried here where she could protect his grave from trespassers or souvenir hunters. Later, his body was reinterred in Mount Holyoke Cemetery in Kearney. Frank James at the farm. Frank James merchandise is passed right up until the time he died here. He stands at 70 before the gate of the Jesse James farm, where curious spectators could pay 50 cents to see the farm. and for just a little more money could even buy pebbles from Jesse's grave. The James family farm is said to have been haunted for more than a century, home to several lingering spirits. Lights are said to move about inside and outside the property buildings. Others report hearing the sounds of pounding hooves, muffled shots, and cries reminiscent of the area's history dating back to the events of Civil War. Today, wide arrays of mysterious happenings occur in the house. Reports frequently show that lights are seen inside the building long after it had been locked up for the evening. Even movements are often seen that are never registered on security monitoring systems. Staff reports the feelings of a presence within the home are extremely intense. Others report that hushed voices and restless horses can be heard from the nearby woods on foggy mornings. However, when they follow up, there are no signs of disturbance or tracks within the trees. The Jesse James Farm Museum is at 21216 James Farm Road in Kearney, Missouri. That is some of the hauntings. Don't forget tacos. Yet Jesse turned out of the way. He would have had a good heart towards other human beings despite his upbringing. Isn't his grave on top of the hill? His grave is actually right next to the house, his former grave. The stone is still there at the actual house. Now, some of the hauntings that are there, the reason why I'll tell you our backstory why we went there on tour. One of the tour guides that worked there had sent us a photo. She had her family there. She had taken a picture in the back of the house in front of the window where the firebomb had gone through. Hey, Jeanette, welcome in. Oh, wow. YouTube channels are showing off different. So I thought I would ask. Thank you. So this picture got sent to us. She was taking a picture of the back of the house. Her family was standing in front of that window. Well, this older lady appears in the window, in the glass, 1800s attire, clothing, gray, like a whitish gray hair, long, with one of them little bows in the back. And she had sent us this picture. I can't show it because we were asked not to, because she can lose her job. So I can't show anything from there unless they give me permission. Christy, it was actually the mother, Zerelda. She showed up in the window behind that tour guide's family. So that sparked our urge to go there and see, hey, can we debunk this picture? There's got to be something reflecting through the window that's casting that image in the camera. So we knew the tour guide that sent it to us. We went out there. During the tour, we watched the movie. Yeah, she's kind of knew him, and she's angry. Yeah, she's angry. So we watched the movie, and when you get done watching the movie, you walk up to the house. Tour guide greets you outside, tells you about the outside where the stepfather got hung from the tree. Our story when we were there, the night before, we had just come off a residential investigation, and there were some kids there as well on the tour. There was a bunch of tourists. And she got talking about some of the hauntings, and she was telling them that we were paranormal investigators. We investigate hauntings and stuff like that. And she told them about a picture, and that's why they're here. They're here to check it out as well. And so I can remember these kids, and they were going, "There's ghosts in this house." And she says, "There is some stuff in here that we can't explain." I sense that through you talking about it, mate. Intense stuff. And the kids were like, "Well, we need Ghostbusters." And she points at us and she goes, "Well, that's what they are. They investigate that stuff." And I told my dad, and I told everybody after the tour, if you got any questions, feel free to talk to us. So after you get that, you go into the house. She takes you, you go into Frank's room where him and his wife lived out their days. Then she takes you into the modern kitchen, which was remodeled in the 50s for Frank's grandkids lived there. His grandson lived there until he passed away in the 50s. I think he passed away in like the 60s or something like that. The living room is still original 1800s, all original wallpaper, kerosene lanterns. Furniture is all original. They do not allow flash photography in there at all because flash will deteriorate stuff in there. So we walked into the back bedroom where Zerelda's room was, where her bed was, and the tour guide was telling us sometimes she's walked in there and Zerelda's rocking chair would be sitting there going like that. It would be rocking, sitting there rocking. And then soon she'd walk in the room, it would stop. Well, Zerelda, she's still living out her days watching her son's grave because it's still pointed right out that window where that stone is, Jesse's former grave is. So she's still reliving her past. And I believe it's some residual and some intelligent. So we go back through and we go back into the living room. And we're standing there and she's talking about the modern kitchen before we go into the older kitchen where the firebomb had come through. And we're standing in the living room and she's standing in the doorway talking. And there's a guy that was from Louisiana there on tour. He was working the pipelines here in Missouri, and he knew what we were up to, and he was following us around. We kept hanging back because we wanted to experience the paranormal part of it. Besides the tour, we let the tourists all go ahead because that's all they were interested in. And my dad and I are standing there, and he taps me on the shoulder. And he says, "Hey, look down behind you." And I look down behind me and I'm standing in front of there's the window here. There's a rocking chair here, table in the center with a kerosene lantern on. Well, I'm standing there and my dad taps me on the shoulder and he says, "Look down behind you." I look down behind me and both rocking chairs are sitting there going, they're just rocking. It's like two people are sitting in there just watching us go through the tour, like not a care in the world. And even when we looked at them, they were still rocking. So we had someone with us. I tapped them on the shoulder and I said, "Look behind me, look at the rocking chairs." And they tried to accuse me of kicking it. I says, "I'm nowhere near them. So how am I going to kick them and get them going? Nobody's near them. We're not even leaning on them because you're not allowed to touch any of the furniture." So we went through the house, went into the kitchen where the firebomb come through the window, and she was telling us about that. We get done with the tour, we go outside to Jesse's grave. The guy from Louisiana comes up, starts talking to us, and he says, I was watching them rocking chairs the whole time. They were rocking on their own. Nobody was near them. Nobody got near them. And he said they've been doing that for a while. There was another rocking chair over in the corner, but they had a fan going because it was hot. So we didn't interpret that too much. That one was rocking, but we interpreted that every time the fan moved, it would move the chair because the fan would rotate. So outside, we're talking to the tour guide. She let us go back to the house with her while she locked it up. And she says, I want to show you that room. Here's that window I took the picture. We got looking at the walls. There's no picture of Jesse's mother. There's no pictures whatsoever on those walls. So we couldn't debunk that image that she had sent us. So we got done, went outside with the tour guide after she locked the house up. We stood in front of that window to try to recreate that picture. And long and behold, she takes a picture of 3 of us in that window, and between myself and another person, you see a cowboy hat reflecting in the window, like it was laying there on a table. We were just in the house. There was no cowboy hat. There's nobody wearing a cowboy hat that could cast that image and shadow in the window. So, oh, cool. So we got looking further into the pictures. Up in the one corner appears the face of a young Jesse James. And I'll see if I can find the picture for you guys of the one that we saw in there. Actually, I'll just do it this way. I'll share my screen with you guys. If it'll let me. But so we look there, and there's a young Jesse James in the window along with his mother. And the tour guide had told us that if we'd like, we could go up to the slave quarters and do whatever we wanted up there with recorders, spirit boxes. She was like, you can do anything you want up in the slave quarters, which is off the back of the house. It's like a little shed they had up there. And so we went up there and started doing our thing up there. And on the spirit box, I asked, Jesse, are you here with us? And you hear a clear voice come through and says, yes, I am here. And I asked, is Frank here with you? And he says, yes, Frank is here with me. I said, how about your mom, Zerelda? She was there, and shortly after that, you hear a voice come on of a kid, and he goes, I'm here too, which was Archie Samuel, Jesse's little stepbrother. I don't think a fan is strong enough to make them move. Yeah, we couldn't dive too much into it because of us being on the tour. I mean, I would have loved to work with it. But even when we went back through the house with the tour guide, the chair wasn't rocking anymore, and that fan was still going. So, and I went in front of those other rocking chairs, and I bounced on the floor. I tried everything. That's awesome, Christy. I think the next video you should do is Tombstone. Yeah, I'll do a Tombstone one. This was the picture of Jesse that showed up in the window. Was this image right here of a young Jesse James. And so, yeah, I bounced around on the floor, tried everything I could in there to get those chairs to rock, and they would not move. The tour guide was telling me that the night before, she come up the lot to the house to check on it, and this was close to dark. She walked up, and that where that rocking, those two rocking chairs that were rocking on their own, they ended up, she saw the lantern, the kerosene lantern was lit in the living room. She opened the door, walk in, nothing. She said this was happened quite a few times. She would see something pass in front of the window. She would see the curtains open up and move. They have an alarm system on the house, and sometimes the motion detectors would get triggered and then others won't. Ghosts or specters, they don't see what we see. Exactly. And we'll go into a little bit of my cousin Kathy's place has ties to Quantrill and Jesse and the Civil War as well through Missouri. Her husband Brad, his family used to hide Jesse and Frank and the crew out when they would come through, and they have diary entries of it being documented that Jesse would stay at the house. It would be at Brad's grandfather's house. They would hide him out in the barn. They would feed him as they would come through. Jesse would give him money, and like I said, the one girl had a crush on Jesse that wrote the diary entries and stuff like that. And which is not too far from Kearney, where they live. I mean, you go through where they live, and then you go right over into Watkins Mill, and right from Watkins Mill, you can jump right down to where Jesse's farmhouse is. Yep. And I mean, I can believe Zarelda be a vengeful spirit because of what happened to her son. I believe Frank could be too. So the museum down there, they have all the artifacts in the museum down there. They have Jesse's guns, his boots. They have Frank's wife's dress in there. The top of Jesse's casket is in there. The bullets that were in Jesse's, that went through Jesse's head into the wall, they got. Yeah, they would pilfering and rob people here too. Yeah, and that would be Ray County, Missouri. So, but we had a digital recorder running in the museum, and I've captured. Yeah, that's when they rode with Bloody Bill Anderson. And that digital recorder I had running in a museum, I caught several EVPs out of that museum. By Frank's wife's dress, I caught a woman humming a tune there. And then looking at Jesse's grave, you can hear, it sounds like a man talking. You can't quite make out what he says. Yeah, Bloody Bill was shady. He was not a very good guy. They've got his picture up in the museum as well, Bloody Bill and Quantrill, um, and they told me they experienced a lot of paranormal stuff in the museum as well. I mean, most of the artifacts from the house and Jesse and Frank are all in there as well. And but Bloody Bill was pushed 25 miles from here. Yep, and he's buried. He's buried in Richmond too as well. Quantrill was evil. That's what they say about him. And then from what I read earlier, I found on him, he was a respected man from a lot of people. A lot of people respected Quantrill and the hospitality and generosity that he would give, and the Southern women liked him, and oh yeah, I'm sure. I mean, yeah, he was the Confederate guerrilla. But yeah, he's buried in Richmond. I believe Quantrill's buried in Richmond. I know the Ford brothers are, because I wanted to go to the cemetery at night and try to do an EVP session with the Ford brothers and see if I can get them to communicate. But we had permission from sheriff's department, but local PD said they didn't want us in there after dark. So we never ended up going. But yeah, that's a little bit on Jesse James and Quantrill and Jesse's wife. Again, if you want Jesse James shirts, holler at me. I've got them. So, and I know there's still a lot of people today that still do not like Jesse James. They hate him. I remember when I posted something for his birthday and somebody made a harsh comment on it about Jesse that I'm gonna I've got two styles of, let me find my other one of Jesse as well. I've got two styles I did. But yeah, Jesse's a big part. I like the history of Jesse as well. Been fascinated by Jesse James since I moved to Missouri. I know my cousin Keith and Carl, they're fascinated with Jesse as well. I did a lot of reading on Jesse James and those guys. Trying to see if I can find my other. I have another. Here's the Frank James one that I did. People who hate Jesse don't know his true story. No, they don't. And they're quick to judge that he was this ruthless killer. And it needs to be mowed. He is in the way back of the older side. But yeah, they have him as this ruthless killer. whoever he was, his ancestors must have gotten killed by him. Yeah, maybe. And I don't think any descendants of Jesse James and Frank and all them are still alive anymore. I don't think so. I think they're all passed on. I was a cellmate with a relation to the Youngers. Should know how. Oh, okay, cool. But yeah, there's a lot of people still to this day you hear that hates Jesse James and the Youngers and Frank. And like I said, Frank was more the ruthless one than Jesse was. Frank would be the one you look at him cross-eyed, he'd shoot you in the head for it. Where Jesse wasn't like that. And but still to this day, a lot of people criticize him and don't like him because of who he is and what he did. I mean, you know, war brings out a lot of stuff in people when you're out there fighting and trying to survive. And so, I mean, people got to understand that too. Here's the other design of shirt I made for Jesse. So if you're interested, I've got two styles right there. Told you that Sandra Bullock's ex-husband was related to the James gang. Yeah, and I think some friends of mine are related through the Kentucky side, which would be Jesse's father's side, because Jesse's wife is from Kentucky, which would be Jesse's father's brother. And so I think there's still some ancestors, some family around, I believe, of the James, but you don't hear very much about it because the way history is, and they don't go through the descendants anymore. Once the grandkids got mentioned and stuff like that, that was it. I know both Jesse's kids are gone. They're gone now, I believe. Because they're on Find a Grave. You can look them up on Find a Grave. You can find their graves and stuff. And but like I said earlier, I don't believe Jesse got killed that day. It's hard for me to believe that he was shot and killed that day. I think he faked his death to get away because of that bounty they had on him, the state of Missouri had on him, and he fled to Texas. I mean, that's just like Billy the Kid. I don't believe Billy the Kid was shot and killed either by Pat Garrett. I think Pat let him go. He'll probably be another one I'll talk about, the mysteries, and I'll try to find some haunting stuff too on Billy the Kid as well. So, and so if you have any more questions, throw them up in the chat. We got about 5 minutes left, and then I'm gonna wrap up for the night. we will be on Sunday. My dad and I will be, and our two special guests, Carol Garcia and psychic medium Rebecca. I may do a show tomorrow night. I'm gonna be around tomorrow night, so I may do another one tomorrow night. Maybe I'll do another one of these outlaw ones. I'll do Tombstone, and we'll do the talk about the hauntings in Tombstone, Arizona, and stuff, and the shootout in Tombstone with Doc Holliday and the Cowboys and stuff like that, and the haunting history of Tombstone. That's on my bucket list of places to investigate is Tombstone, Arizona. I would love to go there and investigate, especially the bird cage out there, the saloon and stuff out there, and investigate that. Yeah, the Earp brothers and the Clantons and all them out there, and Doc Holliday, and that's like that mystery with Doc Holliday and Johnny Ringo that you see in the Tombstone movie. I'm finding history with that never happened. Doc Holliday didn't have a shootout with Johnny Ringo. Johnny Ringo ended up offing himself, and because when it supposedly happened, Doc Holliday was out of town. He was in court at another case, at a case of hit trial or something, is what I read on that. But so we're gonna go ahead and wrap up for the night. We only got about 2 minutes left. I thank you guys for tuning in tonight. Hope you guys loved the show on Jesse James. And if you guys want more content on the Outlaws, yeah, let me know, and we'll do a mix of history and haunted, and the haunted history part of it. Tombstone, Deadwood, South Dakota. Yeah, I have some buddies that went up to Deadwood. Yeah, Jeanette. Yeah, definitely. Let's go to Tombstone. That'd be awesome to investigate that. So with that being said, everybody, remember, if you're being bullied in the paranormal field, you do have a voice. Nobody's better than anybody in this field. We're all after the same common goal to prove the existence of life after death. So with that being said, everybody, God bless. Have a good night. Stay safe this weekend if you're traveling and investigating. I may see you tomorrow night. I may do another show tomorrow night, and we will definitely be on Sunday night, my dad and I, and Rebecca and Carol. So with that being said, everybody have a good night, and we will see you soon. Same time, same channel, and have a good night, everyone.